Thanks for coming tonight. The Habs and the Maple Leafs are playing, so it's a big game tonight. I may switch over myself to watch. And I think, Linda, it's very fitting and appropriate. You're going to go to a panel about war in the Middle East. I will. I encountered. I'll just tell you how. Feel free to ask questions anytime you want to ask about me or the play or whatever as we go through this, and hopefully it'll become more question and answer than me talking. But I will tell you, like the origins of the play was I didn't really know Wajdi Mouawad. He had done one play here at Passmarais, and Alon Nashman was in that play, and the Wedding Day of the Cro-Magnons, which was set in an apartment building. Oh God, it's just like Gaza, where the front part of the building had been blown out, and the family was living still in the apartment, but they'd lost the walls of their building, and it was a wedding day for one of the kids in the family, and this desire to keep some kind of normalcy going in a kind of hysterical condition. So, but I didn't know the play at all, and I don't think it was well received, if I remember correctly. I remember kind of hearing about it, but I think it was very kind of not well received, and I don't think people. I think the reception was about there was simply too much yelling, loudness. I can't say that that's true of the play. I can't say that not having seen it, but and then a number of years later, Scorched came to the National Arts Center, and they have a stage-to-page series, or page-to-stage series, reverse that. And they asked me to come in and direct the play. And I think that probably was because of my work with Howard Barker and the kind of plays that I had done, which were both language-oriented, quite visceral, if you like, in terms of its content, and quite visceral use of language. So I guess they brought me in to deal with the hard ones, if you like. And of course, when you look at Scorched, they speak in passages, they speak in paragraphs, they're elaborate in their speaking patterns, they're repetitive, they're insistent, and they work at a certain level of passion, like loudness, that can get you a bad review in English Canada. And English Canada doesn't like a lot of yelling. So and so anyways, I directed the play there, and I loved it. And I said, I need to direct this play. So at the same time, when I did direct the play, I felt like I needed a shower. So it was pretty intense experience and very moving and challenging in terms of how to do the play. And there was something actually a bit, because it was set in Ottawa, we were in Ottawa doing the casting, and it was basically an Ottawa-based group of actors. It was a bit, and they did their level best, but it was a bit anglicized, in a sense muted, and very hard for them to sustain these passages that are kind of elegies or to their pain and suffering and what they're going through, what they want. Lyrical, repetitive, passionate arias, really, and Wajdi writes in arias a lot, which, if we know about the other well-known Quebecois playwright, Michel Tremblay, he too writes in arias. So it's a very Quebecois thing. It's a very French language thing. There's a lot of musicality to the writing, as well as meaning and all that kind of stuff. But musicality is important, and people speaking in elaborate arias. So how to capture that? And the actors did a good job. But they also only had 2 days rehearsal or something. So fair enough that they could only do so much. But it was kind of muted. It wasn't enough. So it was a great lesson. You discover things when you're working as a director. You discover things about a play by what's not there, and sometimes you see the shadow of the play that's not there when we're doing work, and it leads you to realize, oh, I've got to fill in that shadow and work on that shadow, which will be challenging for English Canadian actors, if you like. Less so with French Canadian actors. You have to also remember the play was developed by his ensemble, which were basically Quebecois actors that he had in Montreal, and they kind of improvised the play. He wrote it. They improvised. He wrote it. So it was very much part of a group. At the same time, he was writing from his tradition, if you like. And of course, there's a lot of Middle Eastern, or maybe I will say even Mediterranean influences in the way that people spoke. So whether it was Latin or Greek or Middle Eastern or Israeli or Egyptian, people spoke in passages. And they were very passionate about what they had to say. And I know this ironically from my own personal circumstance, because my mother was Venezuelan, and so the characters in the play sounded like my Venezuelan family, and they were very loud, and they're speaking Spanish, and I didn't really understand Spanish, so it was even louder, if you like, into my ear. But there was something about the way they spoke, and they too spoke in paragraphs. Nothing was a single sentence. Rarely was there a single sentence used. And that's a lot of what Wajdi's play is about. And a recurring pattern with his characters, he's always saying, listen, no, listen, listen, right? And he throws in a lot of exclamation marks. And he goes around the same topic over and over again, which is very Tremblay-like. And having directed only really one Tremblay, but have read a lot of his or seen a lot of his at the Tarragon, he too uses the word listen a lot, as though people can't hear, as though people aren't listening to you. And so the desire to repeat the word listen over and over again is something where you're not heard, and therefore you repeat yourself or insist or go around the same territory. So that was kind of a personal connection for me into the play, because I understood, even though I'm not a very good Spanish speaker anymore, I understood something about the rhythms of that I heard as a sonic thing, and a very Mediterranean thing, whether Lebanese or Israeli. And Wajdi, so Wajdi written this play, and it was very moving, and I'll say something rather personal, so sorry. But I had gone through a very similar experience about 2 years before I got the play, where I uncovered or discovered accidentally, in a joking, laughing situation with my cousin, talking about our mothers, about the terrible, horrible secret in our family, which had consequences through a number of generations, including my own. And this revelation was shocking, because it was the exact opposite of what I understood to be the truth. There were difficulties in my life, but I never thought it was that. I never thought what it was, which goes back a generation, and it was horrible. And so for 2 years I talked about it with my kids, and sort of was trying to explain this is what had happened in their lives, my mother's life, her sister's life, and so when I read this play, where there are two kids reading at the will, reading about the story of their mother, or their mother saying, you have to go find your father and you got to go find your brother, I went, oh my God, basically. I kind of had, oh my God moment. This is something I've astounded by, and truthful. And of course, the desire to search for the truth which the play is a journey play. Really, it's a journey play in a sense that the the twins are searching or forced to search for their mother's secret and start in Montreal, but have to go all the way back to the old country. And then the mother who's lost her child at the age of 14, taken away from her and sent to an orphanage in the south. And I will say, in a Middle Eastern country that's not to be named. I've already named it, but in a Middle Eastern country that's really not to be named or not to be identified with, which is a very interesting point, which I'll talk about later. As Goff searching for her son, trying to find her son, and spends her entire life trying to find her son. And then, as you know in the play, she does find her son, but it's a horror. And the son ends up being her torturer in a prison in the southern part of the country, and eventually he rapes and tortures the prisoners, but he's particularly drawn to this woman. And of course, she gets pregnant and gives birth to twins, and so he's the father and the brother of those twins that they have to discover. And one of the very interesting things that the mother says at the end, she would have told them, but there are only certain truths. Certain truths can't be told; they can only be discovered. Because if you actually told them, you might not believe them. And in my instance, I was told this, and I did believe it. But you might not believe that because the event of that, the sort of absurdity of having that in your life, and trying to cope with that experience, is extraordinarily challenging to an individual. How to reconcile yourself with that. And remember, if you remember in the play, she goes silent for 5 years after discovering that the torturer is the father of her children, is actually her son. And she goes silent in some way to go inward or to go into a meditation to reconcile, to follow the oath that she had made the father of her son, Wahab, where she had a relationship at the age of 14, who said, always tell him I will always love him, and tell him that now that we're together, everything will be better. And so that's a mantra that she lived by when she was searching for her son. But when she gets there, of course, it becomes very difficult to believe in that mantra. And she has to take 5 years of silence, in a sense, going into a convent or a meditation or a yoga center or whatever, an ashram, whatever, to inwardly delve into her life experience and how to come around to that. Now that we're together, everything feels better, which she does after 5 years. And she, in the end of her life, she says that one night in the hospital and is caught by one of the attendants. Hears her say that. She says a couple of times, and then she passes away, and no one really knows what that is. But she's come to some kind of reconciliation, and knowing that when she dies, she taxes the children, if you like taxes, or asks them to go and search their brother and their father, and to deliver these letters, which reveal the truth of what happened in their life. And if you remember at the end of the play, she delivers the first letter to the torturer, who is the father, and she condemns him. And then she delivers a second letter, which shocks the guy. The second letter comes out, and it's the son where she expresses love for her son. And she tries to reconcile her feelings for him and tries to assure him. And assure is a very important word. I'll speak to that later. But assure him that things will be better, and things will get better, but you will have to take time to repair yourself. You'll be in traumatizing shock at this information, and you'll need to take time to rebuild your psyche almost from zero. What she has to go through, and what the son will have to go through. But she does it as a mother with unconditional love, which is hard to imagine. And how does someone get around to that given the life experiences that she had with this person? And how does she transcend that? So if you remember in the production, at the very beginning of the play, the actors walked out on stage and just looked at the audience for about 45 seconds and just looked at them. And they were completely silent. The house lights hadn't gone down. They were going down sort of as that over the 45 seconds, but sort of you didn't really see that. And you were going down to, the actors just stared at the audience. And it's a terribly irritating thing, I have to say. It was kind of meant to be an irritation. I will admit I was trying to push the audience a bit. Because just like the son can't understand how his mother went silent for 5 years and abandoned him, and that happened when he was like 15 or 14. So you can imagine how messed up you would be, a 14-year-old teenager, mid-teenage, mid-development, and your mother does this and just checks out and goes silent. And you have to raise yourself, you have to grow up too quickly, you have all that abandonment that the two twins go through. One becomes a mathematician and a university lecturer, and but she's lost her heart, if you like. She's all just math in her brain, and at the same time, you've got the other side is trying to be a boxer, put all his anger into boxing. So anyways, I had them come out and do this thing, which is right out of the get-go, and just stare at the audience. And just about, and it was really hard to find this, what the point was. It was just about the people where someone says in the audience, and it was almost every night, when are they going to say something? What's going on? And people got peeved at this behavior, which was not dissimilar really to what the son goes through in a very mild way. But in the theater, everything is sort of so condensed, and it's a crucible of human emotion that 45 seconds can feel like a lifetime. And so at the end of the 45 seconds, when you're saying, "What the fuck's going on here?" Excuse me. What the, and you're inside, but you're going, "When are they going to say something?" Right? And do I have to leave? Am I going to get up and go? Right? And it's just at that emotional thing in the piece, I think it was actually 47 seconds. And that was very, we tried to, over the course of the previews, tried to find the absolute right time. I started out at a minute, and that was a killer. I think they were going to start to leave the theater. They can't be leaving the theater, right? You can piss them off, but they can't be leaving the theater, I think. But that rumbling just started to happen, and then bang, we went into the first cue and we started to play. And the play goes, it's really these almost two stories happening in synchronicity. The twins searching for their mother with the help of the notary, Alphonse Lebel, and the mother searching for the child with the help of her friend Sauda. And the two stories kind of are going around each other. And you see I do this gesture because that was the blocking, basically. That's all it was going around and around each other. Sometimes it's a still point, going around and around and around and around in search of some kind of truth, the truth of what the scenario, the person they were looking for. And failing at it, hitting walls, being frustrated. But in fact, the two time periods are coming closer and closer together. As they do in our lives, we you know, you're a child and you're seeking the problems with why is this the problem? Why is this happening? And you've got your adult person who's also going back in their memory to try and find something, if you like, to try and find some reconciliation to their problem. And sometimes you meet them at 50, as I did, and go, oh, that was the issue. Right. Oh, I get it. So that's sort of what the journey of the kids they're on, and what the mother's journey is to find her child. And they meet in a funny kind of way, but they also meet in a spiritual way, and that there's one scene where actually the impossible happens. The mother she's dead, and she talks to her son in the present tense and says, you've got to go find your brother. If you don't go, you find your brother. You've got to use your fists, Simon, to go find the brother. He's a boxer. You've got to use your fists to go find your brother. If you don't use your fists, I need you to do this. And she's demanding and forceful, and you can tell in that scene how horrible a mother she was. The guy's having a breakdown about his mother having this brother. He can't understand this. He's found out his mother was a victim of rape and torture in a prison in the Middle East. Which is horrible. And he has his brother that must be the love child of that, I guess. Probably not love child, but you know what I mean, child of that. Sex child, rape child. And he's, you know, traumatized by that, and the mother's coming in and just whacking him, right? Move, get going, right? And demanding him to mature, to grow up, to toughen up, to suck it up, to whatever parenting lessons sometimes you pass on to your parents you pass on to your kids. And so you get this confluence of times, and it's kind of, the play moves suddenly into this expressionism, where the irrational possibility of two times meeting happen. So, so in a way we begin to realize that time, which might have a chronology going forward, has a thing going backwards, and sometimes both those times meet. And one of the most interesting things I found with the play was, if we were smarter about our parents and imagined them the kind of things that we went through in our lives when we were younger, we would go, duh, well, of course. Of course, right? She gets pregnant at 14. Her parents are going to force her to give up the child, and she goes, the child is sent away. And then she says to her kids, that they're legitimate kids, if you like, that she is, that there is a brother. Well, very likely it's an illegitimate brother. Very likely it was a pregnancy that didn't want to happen. Like you think, well, that makes sense. And then you go, right, I know a lot of people who have had illegitimate children, or had to give them up for adoption because they were too young, right? And it was the wrong scenario. So for them, and the regret they have that. You go, well, if I just thought about that, I could recognize that my mother or father was going through this kind of experience. It was kind of obvious, in a way, really obvious about our lives and their lives, and what we think might they be, why they were the way they were, and then why they were the way they were with us. And we kind of miss that often, I think. We just can't imagine that they have lives that are not about us, in a funny as children. So, anyways, this play of time that was very important, as these two times meet and actually cross the line and go from a relatively natural, realistic play, if you like, into an expressionist play. And but because there's two times going on, I tended to use an impressionistic approach to the design, because I had to go from Montreal today, or not guess 2002, something like that, and the Middle East during a war in the 1970s. So, and he had to go back and forth in those two locations, very simply and very quickly, because it was something very important that you could feel in the air the presence of your parent, or the parent who's looking for the child could feel in the air where their lost child might be. And in a sense, they walk right past each other for a while, the mother and the daughter. She goes south looking for her son. He goes north looking for his mom. And when he doesn't find her, he comes back and he becomes a horrible killing machine. She goes south. She can't find him. She hits middle age. She's trying to be a better person. There's one horror after another in the war down there. And she decides that her life is not worth living. It's better that she offers her life up to the cause and doesn't kill everybody, kills a leader, which will rock the country. And it's kind of a very sharp execution, if you like, precision execution of a militia leader, which will stop something, will stop the war. She's caught, she's imprisoned, then meets her son, who's the head of the prison. But she kind of has given up at that point and expects to die. She's not expecting to live, she expects to die, and she's put in prison, and then, of course, goes through the next horror of her life, where terribly these terrible circumstances meets her son, and then gives birth to twins, and then has to give up the twins, and the twins are sent to a river where they kill the children from the prison, and she expects the kids to have died, and it turns out the guy can't do it. He can't kill them, and so he takes them to a place by the seacoast and gives them to this guy, says, you take care of them. And then she, by chance, survives this thing, gets out of prison. I guess the war stops, if I remember correctly. It's not really an event in the play, but the war stops. And she is confronted with her two twins. They're alive. So again, this kind of like impossible event happens in her life where she is, suddenly she has two kids, 10 years after she's been released, right when she's released from prison after being 10 years in prison or however long she's in prison, and has to raise them. And she knows who the father is. And she can't tell them. She can't explain to him he's one of the most horrible people in the world, right? In their world down there, and in the world, given his behavior. War crimes guy. And so she has to raise them, and she's been forced to raise them. And as she condemns the father at some point, said, you forced me to raise them. You forced me to love them. And she can never love them because they were products of rape, until she finds out that because the son was a product of love, therefore they must too be products of love, ultimately. And that's part of her process of reconciling herself in this in this situation of trying to get back to some kind of peace, if you like. Trying to make peace with them, trying to give them a peaceful future, and kind of trying to give them unconditional love, which she had failed to do all her life. She could never really love the twins the way you're supposed to as a mother, and they certainly felt that, and they were kind of victims of that, being half raised, if you like. So, putting that 45 seconds, and I thought at the beginning of the play we did this sand clock. We had grains of sand just coming down from the ceiling and piling up there over the course of the preset of the show, because time became very important. Just the idea of measuring time and thinking the time flows this way, well, actually it flows this way, and it also flows that way. So, but that was a start of something that was there. And I did have this image, I think I had it, when I was reading the play over and over again, about a desk, like an office desk. And ironically, it was an office desk that was almost exactly like my father's desk in his office, which was, he's an accountant. So this guy's a notary. It's one of those metal office desks that are cliche classic from the 50s and 60s. And it was buried in the sand, as though like a bomb that didn't go off, it just landed in the sand, and it became the piece, everything we acted upon that, the notary's office, a bed, a hill. It could be reinvented. It was the same furniture, but it could be reinvented and used over and over again in either time periods as they came to each other. It could be a rock outcropping. It could be a building. It could be a desk in the orphanage. It was all meant to be like everything is. If we just look close enough, we would realize the desk we were sitting at also is a place of great love and a place of joy, and it's also a place where maybe some terrible things were done. Right, the same material thing that got reinvented over and over again, because human beings are human beings. They kind of do the same thing over and over again. You know, not necessarily, but you know, I mean, they do go through developments of being young, falling in love, wanting to make love, ending up having children, maybe at the right time, maybe at the wrong time, getting a relationship, experiencing the death of their parents or their grandparents, experiencing the inspiration of their grandparents. So there's a cycle. And if we actually had looked at our lives, we could see that the cycle of our parents might have gone through very similar things. Might have had a time in your life where there was just, you could recognize that a mother might have had an unwanted child. It might have gone through that, and that's why there was this child left back in Lebanon. So the desk became an important thing. And now, Courtney, maybe you could put that wide picture up, actually. So the desk was not as buried in the sand as I would have liked. As you can see there, I think the mound got diminished a bit in this picture. It used to be a little bit more buried. This image that Graham Thompson found overall, though, this sky and this kind of this kind of walls that went around like that, comes from an image of a bombed out theater. I'm not sure where the theater was. I'm not sure if it was in the former Yugoslavia or it was from a war in the Middle East. Can't remember now. But it was almost like a coliseum with a metal girder hanging down over it from where the bomb had gone through the ceiling of something, and this kind of playing area. And so that became kind of the visual idea that there was no there was no beginning or middle or end of this set, in a sense, because of the shape of the wall. And you'll see the entrances are the black holes of the entrances there. And then there's one beside the guy in the middle in the brown suit. There's an entrance back there, yeah. And we actually, the second draft of the play, we made all the entrances like that, where there wasn't really an entrance. You just walked on and you were there, and you walked off and you disappeared. So a little bit of stage magic, in a sense. If you draw the eye to stage left, you could make someone disappear stage right, and you wouldn't even see them go, because it was just kind of seamless. So, and people suddenly appear, and that was sort of the next draft of the set. And one of the great joys of having a show that repeats itself is gets the second productions, as you can refine and take it further, and develop the ideas which you only get to in the first production. And it really is a boon to have the second show and just keep developing it. And I wish we could do more with that with more of our shows. I wish they were all successful, that you could actually take your work and take it further. Just go, oh yeah, I need to do that next step, and reevaluate. what I did and make it go the next step in terms of development of the ideas. And that's just very simple thing, but when we did this thing of going around and around the desk, sometimes someone would be still at the desk in a chair, sitting in a chair, and the other characters would be going around the past, going around them like this, and that person would be still in their apartment. And then so the character Sophie Goulet would be sitting in the chair. She'd be listening to the tape of her mother breathing from the hospital, because this guy who's attended in the hospital taped the mother, taped her silence to see if she said anything when they were gone in the middle of the night, you know. And so she's listening to her mother breathe, and but her mother's walking around, heading south in the country across the desert with her friend to find the child. And she's trying to, if you like, imagine her mother or evoke her mother, what she might have been doing by listening to her breath, which again is another 45 seconds of silence. You know, it's another kind of silence thing. Okay, I'll become like my mother, and I will inhabit her mind and inhabit her mind and see if I can imagine what she might have gone through. And in a way that, you know, suddenly if you think about that experience of using your imagination, I mean, that's the theater gig, right? We're all trying to use our imagination to imagine other people and what their lives might be like, what they were going through. We don't seem to do that often enough in real life, but in the theater, at least we can do that, which I think is one of the joys and maybe the healing aspects of the theater, is that we can take time and imagine and endeavor to use as much of our empathy as possible in the act of imagination to come up with fully integrated characters, people who are human beings, fully developed, roundly developed, where we don't sit necessarily in judgment of those characters, but try to inhabit the truth of those characters, no matter how villainous and no matter what the form is, a farce or a clown show or whatever. All those are still characters who need to be at some point an expression of the human condition. And so, I mean, that's to me how I do plays. Actually, it's very strange actually to think. I would read the play and I just add things and add things and add things, ideas and ideas and ideas, while I'm doing my analysis, trying to cinch the play together of what the play is about, and why do these extraordinary events happen in the play. But at the same time, I'm reading on a sort of double-edged level. What I'm trying to be analytical. At the same time, I'm just coming up with ideas, and I just and I have a pile of ideas, which are I'll show you this. This is, can you see this? These are all Post-its in my script, and those are all the ideas. And very often they're the ones I reject. I pull the Post-its at some point, say, nope, that doesn't work. That doesn't work within the shape of the analysis of the play. So it's a bit of a juggling act between coming up with all these ideas that are impulsive, intuitive, not even sure why they're there necessarily, irrational and rational, and then trying to find a way to see how they serve eventually what I call the line of action in a play, which is basically the ongoing conflict that happens over the course of the piece, the conflict between the characters, what they're pursuing. So in the search for the truth, there are many things in the way of the children searching for the truth. There's their own fears, their own denials, their own feelings about their mother, their own pig-headedness about their mother, their own rage, their own frustrations, their own need to have a mummy. Their, like the complexities of that, and the danger of going into a country where it's just emerging from a civil war. They are in a kind of civil war in their psyche. So there's this outer world has this civil war that the mother's from, and there's an inner civil war in the psyche of the characters, trying to find some peace, if you like. They're warring with they're set themselves to find peace. And then there's kind of a war in the family between sister and brother. And then there's the pursuit of the Nawal and her friend Sauda in pursuing the child. They're fighting against their country, and they're trying not to let their country devolve to savagery, cruelty, genocide, which is what's happening in the war. The war crimes that are happening in that country just get worse and worse and worse. So, for example, now I'm going to say this because, and Wajdi never wanted to be about Lebanon. He was drawing on Lebanon, but he never wanted to be about Lebanon. He did not want it to be a historical representation of Lebanon. He didn't want to write about Lebanon. He wanted to write it at a different level. And so, but there are events in the play that are drawn from his experiences or his knowledge about what happened in Lebanon. You might remember the very famous massacre of Shatila and Sabra in just outside Beirut, a Palestinian camp, and the Israelis let the militiamen go in and massacre the camp. Horrible, horrible crime, just horrible. They brought the United States into Lebanon, I think, at that point. And so the two women are trying to fight that impulse in their country by writing, by using their rationality, by not letting themselves devolve to being what their country people are like, which is a promise that Nawal, the mother, made to her grandmother. Learn to read, learn to write, learn to think, is what she says to her in her dying breath. Get an education, get out of there, right? Leave the village, get out of there. And she goes on and follows her grandmother's, and leaves at the age of 19, searching for her child, but she's walking into the war zone that was very similar to southern Lebanon. I can't remember, in the 80s or 70s. Yeah, in the 80s, I think. But that Lebanon became a horrible place, right? And internal battles within the community. But again, Wajdi was using those as examples of human behavior he didn't want to write the history of. And he wanted to write what the consequences of what that kind of behavior does to people, and the kind of suffering that's the unexpected suffering. And the unexpected events in your life, and how do you transcend that? How do you go further than that? And so in the play, the mother goes silent for 5 years, and the daughter talks to the people in the hospital about why she went silent. Nobody really knows. She then decides to go and pursue that, and goes back to the mother's village where she grew up, and goes from the village and heads on the same path as the mother, south, to where the orphanages were, into the southern Lebanon, again, Lebanon with a line through, to uncover her mother's story, and finds out that her mother was at this prison, and that a jacket that she was left as part of the will is the jacket number of the woman who sang in the prison. And the woman who sang, the daughter thinks it was her mother's friend, but it wasn't her mother's friend, it was her mother. And then she finds out her mother got pregnant, and then she goes into shock herself, into a kind of silence, to kind of recoup from this. So she's kind of knocked out, and the son has to take over because she has found the truth to a degree. And the daughter starts doing the same thing, walking around and around this ellipsis, pursuing, and they miss each other. They're after each other, and they just miss each other. The mother going deeper into the history of Lebanon, and the daughter getting closer to her, but missing, right? In a sense, Yeah, in a sense, they're breathing the same air, but they don't know they're breathing the same air. Or you can't imagine that this was the same air particles. Maybe. I guess that's very anti-COVID, pro-COVID site. But it's just like they were that close to each other, and she can't understand her mother. She can't feel it. She can't find it. She's looking, and then she gets whacked by it. So she goes silent, and then the son goes silent when he finds out that the torturer was his father. No, the brother. It was the brother. He finds that out from a militiaman, or a spiritual leader of the militia, and and then the mother. Wajdi takes us on a cycle again, and the mother hears the testimony of the torturer at this war crimes trial in Montreal, which she was attending because he was there, and she testified for all the women that didn't survive the prison. She's testified on their behalf and tells them, "You've got children," which he finds out in the trial, or the hearing, or the inquiry, or whatever it is. Not just it's a trial. But then he conversely responds to her about her demand for dignity in this moment. And he says, "Well, my mother taught me all about dignity." And he produces a red nose, which Nawal, the mother, stuffed in his diaper as the only way to remember that he was loved, right? And it's a nose that the father gave the mother, Nawal. Wahab gave Nawal. Nawal gave it to the baby as the only touchstone to identify him, right? He still has it, and he is, and he puts it on. He says, "My mother gave this to me," and that's when she puts two and two together, and goes into a catatonia. So, about 45 minutes into the second act is when that happens, and we go right back to silence. And the cast all just kind of comes forward. And if you remember, they stare out to the audience. But unlike the first time, they're not looking at the audience. They're just facing out to the audience. In the first version, eyes were searching the audience. In the second version, they're catatonic, but they're still facing out. And they hold that for 45 seconds. And they're suspended, and they're in shock. The character's in shock, the audience is in shock, everybody's in kind of shock, and you feel the well of tragedy coming up in them. I guess it's actually catharsis. You just feel it, you just let it happen, it just goes. And then while that's happening, there's a theater trick. Which is you lift the lights. When you're doing a comedy in the final act, you lift the lights got brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter, and it makes the audience laugh more and more and more and more. It does work. I've done it. It does work. It's a fantastic thing to do in Act 5 of Shakespeare, because it's just brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter, and you're laughing and you don't even know why, but just encourages them. This was the contrary thing, where the lights were going up, and they were, in a way, they were feeling more, and it was getting so clear and so bright and so hot like the desert sun and so intense that it was building to something. There's emotion in that, the lights going up, as though illumination, a kind of an illumination, a clarity of thinking and thought. Despite the fact that you're in trauma and shock, you can actually see your life clearly, if you like. Was, I think, the part of the experience. And then we kind of went bang, and the lights went down to the desk, which becomes the prison cell of the torturer. And at that point, just as the lights started to go down, the audience broke into applause. Pretty much every night. And I think someone had a question, what delighted me most about doing the play? was when the audience broke into applause. And then I said to the Nicola Lipman, who played the older Nawal figure, the Nawal at 60, I said, you just have to stand there and stare it down, face it down until they stop applauding. Because it could look like a curtain call. Right? The rest of the cast clears, but she's standing there with the torturer and the two kids. And she just has to wait till the applause tailors off. Because there's something so satisfying about having a tragic ending. We have catharsis, we feel something, that is life, right? That's life, right? And this is where I learned, in the analysis of play, I discovered, if you like, or understood that that the play is a romance. It is not a tragedy. And in a romance, love triumphs over death. And the mother has 4 letters she gives out, or 1, 2, 3 letters she gives out. 2 to the torturer, brother, son, father, and then 1 to her 2 twins afterwards. And she argues for love and how you put your lives back together. And she becomes a real mother. To me, it's an amazing moment, as you can tell. Okay, I'm okay. Thank you for bearing with that. But it's a thing that she goes through and says, love does triumph. Don't go down the way she went down. And that's the lesson, the 5 minutes, the 5 years of silence. That's the lesson of the meditation, the inwardness, the thinking, the experience, and reaffirming or discovering or avowing that now that we're together, everything feels better. In a way, she goes back to that promise she made to Wahab, her lover, her young lover. And I have to say that moment when the lights went bang and they went to applaud and then stop, and then the sobbing starts. So that was as she tells the letters, right? Recites the letters, and that's when the audience, what I'm doing now. That's when they're releasing something, and it goes further. So in my mind, the play is a remarkable play. Because of what it does. I'd say it's a minor classic in our canon, in the Canadian canon. It's probably, I would say it is the most significant play that has been written in Canada. And I think it will go on, endure over time, if you like. I think it'll carry meaning. I think it has the import and the affect of Greek tragedies because of these terrible coincidences. Oedipus kills his father, doesn't know it's his father. He's running away from his adoptive parents, so he won't kill them and live on the curse and sleep with his mother. So he's trying to avoid that curse, and he runs right into his dad and in a street fight or a road battle, kills his father. Then he meets his mother, and discovers the Sphinx, and then marries the mother, and and he doesn't know that what's going to happen to him, that the curses still follows him. So these terrible things, these unbelievable coincidences, which are true in human nature, right? There is, as whatever psychologists want to say, young men want to kill their father, and even if it's buried deep in your psyche, and they want to sleep with their mother, even if it's buried deep in the psyche. And thank God for taboo, that we don't do that. But thank God that's repressed. And then there's Electra complex and other complexes and other complexes. The things that, and thank God there's theater, and thank God there is education to teach us those things, so we know that these things exist in our psyches and our minds and our gene structures or whatever, to be aware of, so that we don't become terrible parents or terrible children to our parents or whatever. And so I think there's something profound in Wajdi's play about what you can't expect, what you can't expect in life, and how you have to seek something inside your own life to discover the truth of someone else's life, which is what we do in the theater. We look inside and go, what would that be like? How do I understand that? What do I feel that way? Oh yeah, that's like this, what I had this experience. This is like this, that experience. So I think those plays that are directed well or put together well and beautifully or whatever, our plays are often very close, and this play was obviously very close to me in some ways. But that's where I think this play carries great weight and meaning. And I had the good fortune to direct the English language premiere. I mean, I got a call from Ottawa, from Marty Meriden, said, "We need you to come up here and do this play." And, a bit too gritty for Marty, for example. She's a lovely person. Wouldn't direct a play like this. She was in it, actually. She played Noel, and she acted it brilliantly. The elder Noel. Does anybody have any questions?
I was wondering, you talked a little bit about Impressionism earlier, Richard, and can you expand? One of the things you cover in your directing class is the various styles.
Yes.
Could you talk a bit about that?
Well, in the theater, a playwright, and I think therefore, and the director evokes that, if that's the kind of theater you're doing. A playwright writes in a style or chooses styles, and very often the very good plays move across styles as the story evolves. So in naturalism, what is style in theater is how the playwright uses time and how the playwright uses space. And so obviously time in a naturalistic play moves forward chronologically. So we recognize that time. We see it go from times 1989 to 1990, or over 3 days, or over 1 day, or over 1 hour, but time moves forward chronologically. And remember, these styles are all on a sliding scale. So ultra supernaturalism, 1 second is 1 second in the play. It's not in a more less naturalistic plays on the sliding scale. 1 second is a minute. But it's still moving forward and chronologically and recognizable. And the spaces we're in are recognizable. And a table is used as a table, and the walls are the wall, and the chairs, and there's a window, and there's blinds, and there's we recognize these spaces. They're part of our accepted reality. We all agree that there's blinds behind me. At least I hope we all do. You might be operating in expressionism at times too. So in impression and in realism, the same time still moves forward chronologically. Space is still used in a recognizable way that we all can agree to, but we don't fill in. We don't have a wall. We don't have blinds. I say, "Oh, I'm going to open the blinds," and even then, I can just twist my hand, and a light comes through, and it's like blinds, and we recognize it as blinds. It's real. It's not, but we don't have to have the materiality of the actual blinds like we do in naturalism, but it's used still like you would use it in naturalism. And you do that because, of course, in a Shakespearean play or in Wajdi's play, the spaces are changing all the time. You don't have the ability to move a set on, move a set off. That's just too laborious in terms of the rhythm of the play. And in Wajdi's play, it's not true of his play. And so you move into Impressionism, and the playwright begins to take time. It's still time is still recognizable, but the playwright will flash back. And so suddenly time is out of order. It's not moving forward chronologically in the story. It flashes back, or it flashes forward, or two times are going on simultaneously, right? So it's very hard to move back and forward, so you have to use time and that's why it's an impression of time, but time is can go backwards or go backwards. But in space, though, to do that and have that kind of time change, the space has to be, I said, designed or it's featured in such a way that a stool can become an airplane. And so it's the impression of an airplane when it's just a stool, right? And it says, okay, this is how I'm going to do the show as a director. It'll be an airplane, it'll be the Cliffs of Gibraltar, it'll be a stool, it'll be a car, it'll be a puppet, and it's an impression. You create an impression of something using just the stool, because that's all you really can have on the stage to keep moving forward in time, right? And expressionism is where time is irrational and the space is irrational. So, I mean, people having delusions, experience irrational things, that's expressionism. Dreams are expressionistic, right? Time and space is not chronological. It can be any which way it wants to be. It's really a product of the playwright's imagination of how they want to write their sense of the reality, which is an inward reality. And it manifests itself in the way that time is used irrationally and space is used irrationally. So you can zoom to the moon, like right now. And I can say that and I can be in the moon. And that's, but I'm with my dead grandfather. So that's impossible, right? That's when the mother's talking to the son, it's impossible. And she's walking around him, again, she's walking around him, trying to rev him up, get him to go, and he's sitting at the desk and he can't leave the desk because he's paralyzed by what he's learned. And he's just read the testimony the mother made in the first hearing. And he's devastated by what she went through and what she said. And she's walking around him trying to get him out of that chair and get him going to this Middle Eastern country.
All that stuff about pure maths and the irrationality of pure maths in a way, but also the focus on sightline, what you can see and what you can't see. If you're inside that five-sided thing, who can you see and who can't you see? And I think.
Oh, the polygon.
Yeah.
The polygon. Yeah.
Mind, then the movement of people who can't see one another or can see something makes more sense, I think. I wouldn't describe that play as irrational. I would describe it as following a different kind of sightline.
Well, it's just suddenly there's an impossible experience. The dead mother's talking to the live son. How is that possible? It moves, but it's on a sliding scale, Helen. It just moves one scene into that, because that's where his emotional psyche is, of the son, that he hears his mother talking to him as a real thing. And then he starts to, and then I elaborated upon it. I had him chasing her. But then I had him chasing her like a little boy trying to chase his mummy, you know, they're kind of like, their arms out like this in the playground, and they're going, mummy, right? And he's trying to go after her, and then she disappears. She just slips away in one of those magical entrances, exits. And but that's the polygon of not being able to see. They can't see each other at some point. They can see this person, this person, this person, but they can't see this, right?
You can't really understand the polygon because you only see like a triangle.
That's right.
I know about the other bits.
Yeah.
Everyone else is seeing a different triangle.
And that's really what the mother's asking them to do, is to go and see the other bit, right?
Right.
Discover this other bit, right, that you can't see. Step out of wherever you are, and uh, and try and see the other side. It's really while the daughter is talking about the polygon, she goes, "Duh." She goes, "Well, I can't see." She's saying, "You can't see this. You have to go find it."
Mhm.
And that really motivates her to go back and get the envelope to give to the fa-
Father. Yeah, the daughter
fa-
gives to the father.
yeah, the father, and um, no, the brother. She finds her brother. She's the one who's going to give him to the brother, and that motivates her then to go all the way back to a Middle Eastern country and walk the path of her mother's pilgrimage, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the pilgrimage feeling too there, very much so. Dave?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I was just wondering what you thought about if is it the director's job to work for the playwright? Is there a tension when you're the director and someone else is the playwright? Like, where does that sit, working for versus clashing, or is it somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I know a director wants to have their creativity, um, and so that's where I think it ends up. The director wanting to have their creativity and clashing, but I'm not. I'm not that kind of director. Um, Although I'm sure there are a number of playwrights who would say that I am, and but I like not to think of me that way. I like to try and well, I think the key to good directing is you try and make yourself work disappear. And if you can get to that point and make your work disappear, and you can make the actor's work disappear and the play disappear for the audience, you're doing okay. So I don't want them to see my work. I just want them to see the story. And but no doubt I've done many plays where they've seen my work. So I felt like with Scorched, I one of those. It's one of those once every couple of years kind of thing where you achieve that and you go, ah, yes, okay, I got that. I disappeared, and I think that's better. I mean, I think it's better because I think in the end it's not neither the playwright's work or the actor's work or the director's work, but it's the story's work, and then half the story is in the audience's mind. And so you have to create the right conditions on the stage that the audience can fill in their half of the story, and we all bring. The key is trying to make the audience bring part of themselves to the play, to my mind, so that they tell the story they're in. So you can in acting that's indicating, right? And you're trying to say too much. You're being illustrative. You're indicating. You're trying too hard, right? And the actor's trying too hard. It's like TV acting is like that. It's a lot of indicating in TV acting, right? Oh, I'm gonna cry, Up goes the hand like that, right? So that becomes illustrative, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm trying to make sure that the audience is filling in their own half of the play, and then they're in. If they are doing that, then they're in too. So, this play is very personal to me, so I bring a lot of that to this play when I did it. And I think that's why I ended up finding something out about the play. And the actors did the same thing. And the writers done the same thing. And probably Wajdi did the same thing. And the designers do something. They bring something to it that's themselves into the play to represent something, and then you collaborate to try and make it connect, go through drafts and try to, find the development. And that's where your analysis helps you to make the creative decisions. You can go, yes, no, that doesn't serve the line of action. Yes, this does serve the line of action. This is a wonderful idea. So the post-its that I strip away in my text are all great ideas, Richard, but get rid of it, right? It's just ego. It's just a wacky idea. It's just a funny idea. Who knows why you thought that? But it's also a stripping away, a paring down, an economy in a sense, and by bringing an economy to the work, you let the audience pick up the rest of the economy. That's, to my mind, the key to a vital theatrical experience.
If any folks have other questions but you don't want to speak or don't want to come on camera, feel free to throw things in the chat. But while you're thinking on that, I'll ask you, Richard.
Yeah.
If the experience of, I mean, what you've described is such a visual language in so many ways, the running around the desk, the sand dropping, all of those visual gestures that help us experience the story. What did you do with the radio play? How did you do that?
Well, doing the radio play, I recognized how long some of those passages were. In fact, I helped out a bit. Because so that was really the speaking time, right? The time it took to speak. And now, I mean, I can't remember what I did in the play with what I did to help the actors say those speeches. I know I did help them, but and it probably was making sure that what they were playing was an intention, and so that they knew also when they were repeating themselves, why they were repeating themselves. So it still told the story. There was still was an attention that was ratcheting up, and you were repeating yourself because you couldn't be heard. So why couldn't you be heard? And so that gave force and punch to their work and made them vital. I had a couple of people in the cast who were Quebecois, partially Quebecois, and they were interested because for all that Wajdi is from Lebanon, he really writes in the French style. I don't know. I actually don't know how they write in Lebanese theater, or Middle Eastern theater, in a sense. But he really is a French playwright because he writes. I mean, it's like Tremblay. It's just big passages. Every play he's done has had these huge, big, poetic, elaborate passages, which are very of Tremblay's arias, and he writes very similarly. And so you've got Corneille or Racine. You've got that kind of approach to theater. And I've seen shows in Montreal, and they're large, expressive, big gesture, grand theater performances, and you go, oh, how do they do that, right? That's like, you can't, that's too big. And so trying to find a way to work that culturally here in for an English audience was very interesting, to try and not go too far. Wajdi's got a lot of exclamation marks in his script, a lot of exclamation marks. They were all cut or you found different ways of exclaiming or bringing a point of emphasis. Sometimes that could be going to a whisper. Sometimes that can be a kind of intensity, but not loud, And because he was capturing something, I think, that was, I suppose, Middle Eastern or Mediterranean or something I hear in Spanish. I hear exactly what it is. And so Wajdi being half French, half Middle Eastern, I'm not sure how long he actually spent in the Middle East. He was just there as a kid, I think, and then lived in France and then Quebec, and was theatrically raised in Quebec, if you like. That's the question. Yeah, okay. So dealing with that language is very, very important, right? And having the articulation. as a playwright, he demands actors who have a skill set with language that's, I suppose, of the classical world. You know, you have to be able to speak long speeches and make them evocative. And characters live that way, right?
Dave, I think you had another question.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear more about line of action and like why you choose that lens to think of story.
Well, when I teach a directing class, I ask people what do they think a director directs, and you know, they talk about, well, the director directs the atmosphere. I said, okay, well, what's that? Right? Atmosphere's lights, sound. I don't think the director he asks for that, but what does a director create? That's what I ask. And we talk about this, and no one kind of really gets it. And some people do; they get very close. But I think part of what I've learned is I've gotten very precise with what I do as a director, and I direct. A director directs action in time and space. And that's like an equation. I know it seems almost, you know, E equals MC squared or mathematical about it, but, you know, plays move through time, plays move through space, and there are events in time and space over the course of the story that evoke the story. And the event is the conflict between characters, and the action is what they're fighting, is what they're conflicting over. And so what I'm really doing is telling the story or evoking the story of conflict as it moves through time and space. I'm not writing the story, the playwright's writing the story. I'm not writing language, the playwright's doing that. That's their territory. I'm doing the thing that evokes the conflict that moves through time and space of the story. In a way, it's kind of really great. It's liberating because it simplifies, and maybe doesn't get you into clashing, you know, because that does happen, but that's what I'm looking to do and identify, and I do that as a dramaturgical task. I try to identify to the playwrights what's the action of the play, what's happening in the play, and where you're repeating it, or something's not happening, or it's unclear, it goes tangential. The conflict goes this way, or it's a conflict with something else, or it's and the conflict doesn't keep going forward. That's not to say you can't have beautiful, rapturous, poetic passages of language, but there has to be a kind of why or an intention, why someone's doing that, to make somebody fall in love, to mourn somebody, to grieve somebody, to express something that's inexpressible, to renew love, to, So that way the actors are grounded, and that way those long passages are interesting, because they're human. And we're all, I believe, as audience members, all poets. We have massive speeches inside us. You go to a meeting and it's terrible in the meeting, you don't say the things you're supposed to say, you walk out of the meeting and you go through the whole meeting, I should have said this and I should have said that. And you're articulate, you're wonderful, you're free, and you're totally together. Well, that's you just making a big speech. That's Hamlet. And we all have that in us, which is why I think the audience can recognize characters on stage, because they kind of have that same thing that they can feel, think, and be in sync with, which I think is also why directing is, you don't want to talk down to your audience. You don't want to indicate. You don't want to be illustrative. You want them to use their imagination, because I think their imaginations are vast. And nobody is who we think they are. There's stories in people that are amazing, and you know, the 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 old elderly little lady who survived the war, right? And has great stories about how she saved so many people. And you go, oh, okay. You know, like that people have all sorts of heroic insides, I think. You know, small ways, big ways. You know, just being a good parent. That's pretty heroic, you know. Those kind of things. So I think that's what to my action is in time and space. And you can see how the conflict moves. Like it goes from here, it goes to there, it goes to there. And the playwright's providing you with the time. It says the space. You know, you're in a castle, and then you're in another castle. Then you're fighting with your daughter, and then you go to your other daughter's palace, and then the two daughters come together, and you go crazy and run out in the heath because you're so mad, and you're in a rainstorm. I mean, there's all these different spaces, and you go, okay, he's going from civilization of his own court down the rungs, right? He's moving from his own palace to living with his daughter, to then living with his other daughter, then he's going to be forced into a retirement home, and he goes crazy, and he bolts, right? He bolts and runs out onto the heath because he thinks he should be loved, right? And he's been a terrible dad, and he's not loved. So, but you can see all the spaces there, right? You actually start to go, oh, he has a mansion, and then he's out in the heath. It's a huge arc. He's become homeless, right? And then he tries to take off his clothes to join poor Tom, right? You know, he becomes even less of a king. You know, that's just watching that story of space, Dave. You know, just there goes the space. Okay, there, right? And then they never leave the battlefield, right? There's a battlefield, the heath, the battlefield. It's almost the same. And then he dies on the battlefield or at headquarters.
That's great, thanks.
Any other questions? Harold, you're such a tremendous fan of the Tarragon.
Well, beat me to the question about translating the play from the onstage version to the acoustic version. First of all, thank you so much for such a wide range of plays that we've had in the Tarragon Acoustic. And I suspect this was probably the most challenging one of the plays to translate to the acoustic format.
I think Courtney, who directed a number that might disagree. She had to do 7 stories. That was hard. All characters, different voices, same location. That was well done.
But no time changes. You had endless time changes.
That's true. Yeah.
But no, I just wanted to say how much I've enjoyed the whole acoustic series, and Richard, especially your generosity for tonight to share the time with us and share your experience with this play, that it's been just like being back in Audit the Season again, which I enjoyed so much and really have missed past year. But this was like another taste of it. So thank you to you and to Courtney as well.
Kind of you, Harold. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think we'll wind down there, but I wondered if you'll bear with me I'll just share my screen one last time, just to look at these shots again, Richard. And I do have a sneaky question about lighting before we go, and maybe we could wind down on that, which is that I notice, you see all the barn doors are in quite a bit, sort of boxing out. It's kind of wonderfully oppressive, actually. I just wondered if you would talk a bit about the lighting.
So, it's a bit unique to the Tarragon. It's something I discovered with Graham about angles. Usually lighting comes from the top, right? So it comes from up there like this and 45, and it's above you, or maybe it's like a footlight below you, right? And we kind of recognize those angles. You know, the sun's here, and the shadows over here, and so it's kind of a naturalism, if you like, right? We recognize light and shadow, and typically in the theater lighting, which is why the light comes from above for the most part. But then there's garish stuff like from below, or like light from a fire, which is from below, or a candle, which is from below. But there is a thing in the tarragon when you use the booms at the side that if you shoot in almost directly at head's height, so the lights are quite low, down by the side, and they shoot directly in at the actor. And they actually remove the shadow and flatten out the faces. So the actor looks, yeah, her face is quite flatly lit. There's less use, there's of course some shadow, of course, because there's a number of different actors, different angles. But she's quite flat lit, and all the people behind them are quite flat lit. So it has an unusual, unnatural effect. And it could be similar to sunrise, sunset quality of light, that angle of lighting, if you like, in a sense. And it's a little more, I think you probably said the right word, oppressive. There's no beauty to it. It's just straight in at you, lit from the front, flat, and so there's a good example. They're all that's the 45-second spot where they're all just like listening to the hearing, and not long after this they'll go into a silence. But they're just flat, almost unemotional, not coloring it, not trying to bring anything to it, clinical, if you like, except when he put color to it and changed it to blue or amber, that kind of stuff, that's where you get color. But it's not trying to evoke real, it's trying to evoke more abstract, I think, feel to the lighting. Because the lighting doesn't work like that in life. I mean, the nature doesn't work like that. Maybe sunset, sunrise, but probably not. Probably still above you, the light. So, well, I'm just looking at you, Courtney, and I'm looking at the picture, and you look at you, Courtney, you've got a light on the side of your cheek. You've got your dark in the middle, light on the other side, so I don't know, it's windows or whatever. So you've got shape and texture and a kind of recognizable light. The light in the pictures would flatten you out. And I want it to be a bit clinical. I can't tell you why. Maybe that's the desert, an image to me in my mind of the desert where there's no shadow. There's something haunting about it. I've used it a number of times, and it's my favorite angle of lighting in the Tarragon. I'm not sure I tried to get another theater, and I couldn't get it because the lighting bars are too far away, and then it just doesn't shoot in or shoot in like this. It just gets a little too high, and so I like it because it just says just do it, and then you play with intensity. It's the level of the lighting instrument going up and down that you play with. You don't play with angle. You play with brighter, softer, and of course when it comes near the end part, we were just blasting in light. We were turning everything up to full, and getting rid of gels and lights and all that kind of stuff just to get as much flatness.
Scorched, right? There's something about sunlight scorching things.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, like it was just whatever was going on was too hot.
Thank you for indulging that curiosity.
All right, so great. Yeah.
Thanks, folks, for joining us tonight, and thank you, Richard. That was really nice to hear a little bit of your work.
I do cry all the time when I talk about that part of the play, so I can't help it. I just get to that part when I'm teaching. I go, oh yeah, Jesus, like how do I get around that corner? And I never do get around that corner. It's such a beautiful, just such a beautiful gesture on the playwright's part, and then the mother's part to try and go further. That makes you feel the play in a way that elevates it to, transcends the trauma and the danger that those kids have gone through.